come from the Nova Scotia Centre on Aging. We have in Halifax at Mount St. Vincent University. Our mission is through research, education, and community engagement. We really are trying to advance the knowledge of aging, to inform social policy and practice, and really enhance the quality of life of older people. We are affiliated with the Mounts Department of Family Studies and Gerontology, and we do have a master's program in this area. We also have, of course, a management board and advisory board. We're currently celebrating our 30th anniversary, so that's very exciting for us over the next year. We do a range of different areas and topics. You can see it on the corner of the slide. They're all focused on this quality of life for older people and their families. And we do that through research on family-friend caregivers, through home care, long-term care, age-friendly communities, care of people with dementia, as well as elder abuse. So it's extremely exciting to be here because it is the International Day of Older Persons, and to be celebrating that at the global, one of many global initiatives today. We're also part of the decade, the UN decade of healthy aging from 2021 to 2030, really focusing on the value, the importance that older people bring to our society, and the importance of staying healthy for as long as possible. So what am I going to do today? So just a little bit of my outline. Hopefully you can follow me. I am going to talk about ageism. I'm going to frame that in a societal or population aging level. Then I'm going to talk about it at the community level, looking at areas such as rural context, looking at specific institutions in that community, and then some of the ageist attitudes towards individuals. I'm going to have a special section that talks about the pandemic and the way in which it reinforced those underlying and sometimes hidden aspects of aging. And most importantly, I think, offer some suggestions or ideas about what we can do about it. And I welcome your questions at the end of my presentation. Hopefully, again, I'll be there in person so that we can really talk about how to change the narrative, how to create communities and institutions that are more age-friendly and celebrate the contributions that older people are making to our society and have made to our society, recognizing that older people are as diverse as all people. So we need to realize that heterogeneity of older individuals, and as individuals to call out ageism and demonstrate that it's no longer acceptable way of being. So there's always this dilemma about what I want to say and my passion for getting ageism on the agenda and what you are in fact interested in. And hopefully that gap, that overlap in the middle is a little wider than this, but we'll find out in the question period for sure. So what is ageism? Essentially, it's prejudice or discrimination against older people, and that can be at an individual level. So someone is prejudiced or makes assumptions, stereotypes of an individual, or it can be at that larger systemic level. So talking about the burden of older people on our society, on our healthcare system, et cetera. So we're going to talk about both of those areas in my presentation. And so while I'm doing this, I'm going to look at them from that society or macro level, those values and beliefs and prejudice about aging, the health system context and some of the strategic directions that are happening, and all of the emphasis on innovation and change. And so the and then there's also the community level, or what we call the meso level, thinking about communities, workplaces, community services, that rural context as well. And then the individual myths and stereotypes of older people. So let's talk about society or the macro level first. And let's just to frame this or bring some context, I am going to throw around a few numbers. So let's talk about population aging and the proportion of people over the age of 65. As you can see from this graph, Atlantic Canada has the highest proportion of 65 plus. So this was as of July 1st, 2020. And I do have a next slide is on this with the census. Did you see that New Brunswick and Newfoundland are neck and neck in terms of almost 22% of the population being 65 and older. I probably don't have to tell you this, you're probably very familiar with that, but also it is projected by 2038 that over 30% of the New Brunswick population will be 65 and older. The orange graph here is showing the proportion of people who are 75 and older. So you see New Brunswick is actually leading the the provinces in this particular area. The other area that I think is really important is looking at individuals who are 85 and older, because I'm going to talk about that, the idea of lumping everyone together and as 65 and older and suggesting that we're all alike is absolutely ridiculous. You end up with, I think of my own family, my aging mother in her 90s with some forms of dementia, and my older brother who was helping to care for her and run the farm and all of those other things. So that's you're really mixing apples and oranges in that case. Nevertheless, I think it's really important that we realize the way our population structure is changing and the number of people who in fact are age 85 and older. So you can see it from 1966 when there was about 100,000 to 2026 projected to be 1 million. So that's just such a major shift. And you can see also in the it projected how fast it's growing as well. And so I think that's important because by 2051 there'll be 3 million, almost 3 million Canadians that are aged 85 and older. I think it's also important to realize that New Brunswick, again, with Saskatchewan, Quebec, and BC, has the highest proportion of individuals 85 plus in the population. And that will, by 2043, Newfoundland and Nova Scotia will join New Brunswick as having the highest proportion of 85 and older. So this is from the 2021 census, just recently published a couple of weeks ago. So that's great. Yes, our population is aging. I think this graph is really important because what it's identifying is the proportion of individuals age 65 plus who need help. And the gray, the yellow, I'll go to the top. The yellow section, these are projected over the course of 5-year increments. The colors are individuals who need assistance or receive assistance from informal care, so family friend caregivers, formal providers such as home care or other paid work, or a combination of both formal and informal. Why is that important? I think it's really important because, as we know, our population is growing in the area of 65 plus, but almost over 2/3 of the individuals are actually don't receive assistance. They don't need help. In fact, they're helping others. So you have many people in this cohort, we call it of 65 and older, who are actually providing care for other individuals. So what are some of the challenges and some of the opportunities of an aging population? Certainly there are age-related health concerns. We've just recently had a report released by the Alzheimer's Society of Canada around the growing a number of individuals who will have dementia. This is kind of a good, I know you're going to find this very strange, but in a way it is reflecting the fact that we're living much, much longer. The reason why we're more likely to have a higher incidence of dementia in our midst. And so there are some age-related concerns. There's also a concern about being able to meet the care needs of older individuals when they need them because of our changing family structure. So because there are more individuals who have fewer children available, and a higher proportion who have no children, and then even the number of children will impact. So we think about it right today, we are still in that situation where the baby boomers are, yes, they're into their 76, 77 age group, but they're often still providing assistance to others. And it's their children, they have had fewer children than their parents. And so that creates this challenge. We also are continuing to adjust our health and social systems that have been built on more of an acute care model and less so on the needs of older individuals. And we're dealing with individual and systemic ageism. We certainly, there's a lot of isms out there, and I think it's important that we raise the awareness of the way in which ageism creeps into our lives. There's lots of opportunities here. There's career trajectories that can be changed, changes in retirement expectations. At one time, you left your employment and that was it. But there's a rotating sort of interest in continuing work on a different basis or moving into more of a voluntary sector. There's a lot of emphasis recently on age-friendly communities in terms, and as well as intergenerational solidarity. And there's certainly recognition that if we improve the healthcare system for older individuals, that we're actually improving it for everyone. So there are some opportunities that we need to see. However, there's still negativity. We still see that attention to the population aging as being a burden on society, as a group that are overusers of the healthcare system, that most of these individuals are vulnerable, most live in nursing homes. And as I'll show you when we talk about the pandemic, that because they're old, they really don't need attention or deserve attention. And that's just a fundamental issue around ageism. There's also the sort of blaming the victim, blaming the individual. So while it's kind of viewed as positive, so you can age successfully through your own lifestyle choices. So the reason why you have chronic illness is because of your choices earlier in life, without recognizing that broader sort of social determinants of health around poverty, income, availability or access to education and so on, that would help to mitigate some of those difficulties that older people experience as a life course, a cumulative life course event. And then there's this idea of retirement bliss. And in fact, that is not a bit of, again, a stereotype that fails to recognize the challenges that people continue to face, regardless of whether they're working or retired. And I wonder if others have seen this Maclean's magazine, this mime really talking about boomers and baby boomers, and suggesting that it's all your fault, that we're all going, the whole peril of our society is connected to this bulge, the python in that, the pig and the python, this book from a demographer written about 20 plus years ago, suggesting that it's this bulge that are at the reason why our society and our healthcare system is not keeping up. So there's, so there's a lot of attention being given to this issue around demography and aging societies and that whole waning inequality across different age groups. So at the community level, we can look at some of the challenges and ageism that is fitting there too, in terms of rural-urban differences and community services. So when we think about rural communities, we often see them in two lights, that in fact, they're isolated and they lack formal services. There's not as much available services to purchase, or home care services, hospital services, or allied health services to help an individual maintain their well-being and health. Or often we see it as warm and friendly places to live. How many times in the Fiona of last weekend did we hear about communities coming together and the strength of rural communities? So there's these sort of differing views of our of rurality and what the experiences are for older individuals in those communities. And certainly in some research that we had done a number of years ago, we identified that there really were different typologies or different stereotypes, I guess, but of older people in rural communities. So you had those active individuals in the community who were the backbone of the community. They were often on their town council or village council. They were leaders in their church. They were organizing NGOs to provide supports for intergenerational fundraising and so on, longstanding members of the community. And so as one individual said, you know, they put on the suppers again and again. That's the seniors. They're always like contributing to the community. They're out there doing their bit too, and they help greatly in the community. So there's that positive aspect. Then another type is a stoic individual. So we think about those proud individuals, private, often isolated in rural areas. Sometimes we think about those striving to be independent. They want to continue to live on the farm, as one individual puts it, until they can no longer manage because it's home, there's privacy, and then they're used to it. And so when I was reflecting on this, I couldn't help but have a picture of my dad, who was a farmer in rural PEI. So just that stoicism that went with that type of individual. And then there's the vulnerable and frail that do exist in the community. They're not the majority, but they do have, some of those individuals would have limited resources like social support or financial resources to support them. They may be disconnected, may be struggling because it's difficult for them to participate without the financial resources. They may have health issues and they need support, but they're quite isolated. And so as one individual in our research said, I'm so comfortable here, really, where would I go? To the city? I don't know anybody there and I can't afford it. And I think we all know with the increasing inflation and rent costs, this is a very real issue for many of the older people who live in the community. And so this, for some of you, I think just to throw in a little bit of a cartoon here, that this is how some people have expressed this. So I don't know if you'll be able to read it, but it says, my sister in the city has 3 doctors, a chiropodist, a physiotherapist, and a home care worker, and Meals on Wheels. Out here, rural area, all I've got is a can opener and a box of Band-Aids. And so that sort of lack of availability of supports and services is very real to the individual. Where next, to think about that sort of community or that meso level, we can think about some of the institutions that are in our communities, like our health services, our community services, or our hospital services. So, you know, just to reflect on how age-friendly is your hospital? Is is the access very clearly marked? Are the availability of the supportive services that you need there when you need it? Or is there long wait lists to access some of those services? Are the signage very clear? Or is it very complex and very difficult to find parking, for example, in the area? What would make your hospital or your community center, your businesses more age friendly? Something to be thinking about. And certainly the issue around health services for older people in the Maritimes is of great concern. Our system is really has been designed for acute care illness, and it's less oriented to that chronic illness or the home care needs of older people. So even with some of the provinces putting far more emphasis on home care, there really are often limited supports and less access to those community-based options like home maintenance or grass cutting or snow shoveling that enable someone to stay and age in place for as long as possible. There's also some challenges with navigating the system. Oftentimes, there are different grants or opportunities, but they have to be understood and they have to be navigated through the system because they're often complicated and disjointed. And so many of the services and supports are only available online. And so even the forms are online. And so there's, this real need for better access, better support to older people rather than having to go and find all of this and figure it out. It's almost, we should be thinking about it in terms of what can we offer you? What, from a government perspective to be going out to older people to say, how can we help you? Rather than requiring people to find their way. There's other institutions, of course, that need to be examined in terms of how age-friendly they are, thinking about our churches, thinking about other businesses, other institutions like community centers. Even this physical and built environment are not necessarily supportive of an aging society. So having cleared sidewalks in some of the community, in the larger areas versus being able to have a space to be able to walk or get exercise in some of the rural communities are all areas that we could improve upon. So this is just another little cartoon thinking about the differences between the current cohort of older people and what might be coming down the pike. So the man in the bathtub says, when I was a boy, we bathed only once a week and 7 of us used the same water. And the nurse is saying, hey, don't give the government any ideas. And I think we're in for a rude awakening. The baby boomers move through the system and go to a care facility where, the bathing may be only once or twice a week. It's not every day which may be the norm for individuals today. So it really does bring home some of the shifts that happen and some of the lack of recognition of giving older people the full quality of life that's needed when they're not able to do it themselves. I put this slide in because I wanted to just pause and also say that, as I go in to talk a little bit about the workforce and older workers, there's been a number of recent reports done with the ministries at the federal, provincial, and territorial levels on seniors and looking at ageism. And these are fairly recent, so that's what I mean by suggesting that the Third Age Center was ahead of its time, in that we originally, I think, planned for this to be in the fall of 2020, my presentation. And since that time, there has been some commission commissioned reports. The one on older workers was actually produced by our center, the Nova Scotia Centre on Aging. And more recently, there's been actually a case study of ageism during the pandemic, where they've examined the way in which the media have portrayed older people. And there has also been a study done on the social and economic impacts of ageism in Canada. So these are, I think, really important studies. I gave you a link here to them. They are part of a consultation that the FTP, Federal Provincial Territorial Ministries, are doing in the area of ageism. So I'm hopeful that after this, and you can go on the websites here, that you will complete their survey about ageism in your own life or your own community, and your reflections on that. The consultation is open until the end of October, so you have October to really let's make a difference in this whole area. And then just building on that, in terms of the older workers report that we had done, we certainly found that there were evidence of ageism in the workforce, older people being passed over for hiring because they're old, they won't stay that long, or for promotion as training, being thought of as warm and loyal employees, but not adaptable and quick to learn. And so there's this sense that the stereotypes of older workers are inherent in the labor force. There's also the whole issue of the inflexibility of the workplace to the caregivers, so older workers who are also caregivers to their aging parents and or their spouses. So really important aspects of this, and just to connect around that, the way in which we need to strive towards more age-friendly workplaces, to recognize the value that older workers bring, to be more flexible in these work-life policies and work care policies, and to train staff about their inherent ageism. No one does it deliberately, I don't believe, but really to try and enforce anti-ageism policies. So, just some stats from New Brunswick perspective. You have 6% of New Brunswick seniors have some post-secondary education, compared to about 49% across Canada. About 20% of New Brunswick seniors are working. 13% of New Brunswick seniors make charitable donations, the highest among all working groups. So the ways in which older people contribute to society is multifaceted and varied as well. And then finally, the individual, some of the stereotypes that exist there. We certainly know that there are multiple needs of older people in our society, and of all people. I mean, I think I say older people, but whether you're younger or older, we all have needs for housing, for nutrition, for transportation. So I think we're not that different as an older individual. But there definitely are some stereotypes that we need to challenge, to expose and challenge, and as your conference suggests, eradicate. So we've heard many of these, that, old people are cranky, they're sex-starved, they're senile. There's these images of the spinster or the dirty old man. They're sad and alone. There's going to be inevitable memory loss and frailty. They'll have difficulty learning new things, depressed after retirement, and most live in nursing homes. Even some of what we say as positive, wise, gentle, kind, cute. Like, isn't that cute? You know, when you see an older couple walking down the street, well, isn't that cute? Holding hands, isn't that cute? The sweet granny, the wise old man, you know, they're very stereotypical, one and gendered, right? So the sweet granny never, and the wise old man, and he's so sharp for his age. We use that phrase quite often, as if age would cause him not to be sharp. And so this is, these are some of the things that we need to challenge. How do we talk about and how do we treat older people at that individual level? We often use what is termed elder speak. Oh, sweetie, dear. We use that sort of paternalistic language as if we know best for individuals, be they residents of long-term care or be they other individuals in our society. We have to protect them. We have to take care of them. And, you know, there's this lovely poem about an older individual thinking, you know, when you were young and you were climbing the trees, I was afraid for you, but I let you go because I knew it meant something for you to do that. So how do we balance, as individuals caring for older persons, the right for them to make choices that they themselves, if they have the capacity, of course, to make those choices to live with some risk in their lives, because let's face it, we all live with some risk in our life. And so to being less paternalistic in terms of the adult son or daughter or neighbor who thinks they know best for mom. And if you're interested in this area, I have a TED talk called What Should We Do About Mom? Maybe we should ask her. And that was certainly, my mom is now deceased, but it was a reflection of my own situation in a large family of 9 children and different perspectives of wanting to protect my mother who didn't want to leave her own home, and how could we support her as opposed to saying you should be in a nursing home. And so this is I'm not saying it's easy. I think it's very difficult because we try to balance the dignity of the older person and their striving for autonomy, as well as trying to support them in the situation that they find themselves in. Sometimes we're just dismissive. You know, you're almost ignoring. I remember the time my mother-in-law, we were at a restaurant, and yes, she had dementia, but the waitress only talked to me and asked me what she would like for lunch. And I thought, well, you could ask her. I mean, she may have dementia, but she knows what she likes. So let's give her a chance, you know, to be able to let's treat her with dignity. She is an individual. She's sitting in front of you. Please look at her and ask her what you need to know, as opposed to ignoring or dismissing her. We often, you know, at a more macro level, frame population aging as a problem. We talk about the silver tsunami, as if it's all happening at once, which it clearly is not, where population aging is occurring over time. And we have a lot of self-ageism. We do dread getting older, and certainly some of us dread getting older, I guess. Some of us also see those opportunities, and some of there's some losses, but there's also some gains as well. So I think that's really important to talk about and think about. So then there was the pandemic, and I'll just spend a few minutes on this, and then I'll do some positives, I hope, related to what we can do about it. But I just wanted to say, I think it's really important to reflect on some of the overt ageism that we saw in the media. So, you know, the WHO chief saying our lack of concern about older people really shows our moral bankruptcy. The worst I've seen is the Texas lieutenant governor who suggested that older people should volunteer to die in order to save the economy during the pandemic. Real people won't die. rhetoric around who's at risk for the coronavirus. And so that really sparked that debate about ageism and ableism around people with a disability. So most of the people dying were from COVID-19, particularly in the beginning, were older. But we cannot just treat them as statistics. These are all individual persons with families, with a life well lived, and need to respect that. It's true that age was a risk factor for the virus severity due to some of the physiological changes that come with age. There's no denying that, and that the nursing homes were the hardest hit in Canada. But if you look at the media, and I encourage you to go to this report that was commissioned by the Federal Ministry for Seniors, the paternalistic language that painted all older people as vulnerable and as in danger and in need of being protected is rampant among our health officials and media reports. And so the whole tragedy then was also discounted because it was suggested, oh, well, they're old and frail. They're going to die anyway. If COVID didn't take them, something else would. As if, that their lives weren't as meaningful because they were older. So what actually happened, at the micro level, 70% of the deaths in Canada occurred in long-term care, 70 to 80% in wave one. It was absolutely devastating. There was, little was understood about the asymptomatic carriers. Our nursing homes had double and triple occupancy, and that contributed to the spread of the virus. Certainly in my province in Nova Scotia, the whole devastation at Northwood Continuing Care Facility was just an evidence of the chaos that happened. And then there was the whole family locking the families out or not allowing them access during the first 6 months of the pandemic, and what that did to the residents and also to the family members around their own levels of anxiety and concern about their family member in the care facility. At the macro level, we now know that all or most of the preparations were not done in long-term care. They were done in acute care. So the pandemic policies, the funding, the personal protective equipment were targeted towards acute. Long-term care system was already undervalued, and continued to be that poor cousin of the healthcare system. And that sort of, we talk about the cracks in the system, but what happened during the pandemic was that, long-term care became a chasm. It just opened up the whole vulnerability or lack of support for that system, and which really borders and draws from an ageist society, or that sector somehow wasn't as deserving as other health sectors in our provinces, not just New Brunswick, not just Nova Scotia, but throughout Canada and globally as well, I would suggest. So what were our key lessons? We recognize that long-term care has long-standing, pervasive deficiencies. We know that the members of long-term care have increasing complexities and other chronic illness comorbidities, and we definitely have issues with recruiting and retaining staff. So really, COVID-19 put a spotlight on this long-term care, a whole long-term care system, and these are just some of the numbers, and they continue to be high in the first and second wave. And even by late November 2021, 53% of the COVID-related deaths were long-term care residents. What happened with the vaccine really made a difference. So most provinces introduced a vaccine mandate. The vaccine was targeted to residents first, and then the boosters as well, and that continued. Eventually, Ontario, some of the provinces backed down from the mandating their staff to have vaccines because of the staffing shortage. But I just want to show you this graph because I think it really shows that just the impact that vaccines had on our long-term care system when we began to identify that. So the largest increase of deaths were in April 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, and then in November and December 2020, when before the instance of vaccinations. So with the vaccinations, you see a huge decline in the number of deaths as well. So this is very important. And then it's also important to recognize that people didn't just die because they were old, that in fact, what we call excess mortality is happening, that there were 1,800 more deaths per year compared to the 5-year average over the same time period. So that's really important. And I think it's important that we did implement those vaccines as soon as possible, and it made a difference. I thought this graph was quite interesting because it shows the long-term effects of the virus. This is the life expectancy estimates for 2021, and it is US data, but I think it's important where you can see that both the increase in life expectancy has been on a steadily increase over the last forever, really. Well, except for if you look at some of the gender specific during World War I and World War II, but the huge impact that the pandemic has had on our life expectancy in 2021. Now, this is going to caveat, this is probably going to change as we continue on into the future, but it does show that the huge impact that the pandemic had on our system. So definitely we need reform in long-term care. This began a series of reports that were done by many of the provinces, as well as a Royal Society report I was part of that looked at the need to restore trust in the system and the need for national standards in long-term care. So as a member of the National Standards Committee, I know that we will be releasing these standards in December, I believe, and those are to promote the resident-centered care and balance safety with quality of life of the residents, and also will recognize the value of having family caregiver support, as well as having qualified staff involved. Lots of identification in the media about the urgency for long-term care. I won't go through these, but it really did highlight the whole challenge that our sector was experiencing. So what can we do about it? Well, there's lots we can do. First, I think we have to challenge ourselves to change the narrative. We need to begin to see an aging society as an untapped resource, that in fact, older people contribute to our society and they continue to contribute to our society. And at a certain point, yes, a small proportion of older people are not able to, but that doesn't mean that they haven't contributed in the past. We need to address some of the ageist policies and practices that are inherent in some of our systems, and look to those that promote justice. We look to that human rights to be treated as an equal, even in old age. And I at the conference that I've been at in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, one of the older members of the committee said, we were talking about artificial intelligence and digitization and all of the algorithms that are actually underlying hidden ageism about targeting or not targeting older people who will get access to certain sources of information. So we need to make some changes that will benefit all people across the life's course. So how can we do that at the community level? We can certainly start to look at our communities and our institutions to see how they can be more inclusive and accommodating to our older population. That can be started with age-friendly communities to consider areas where we need to develop a process for creating an age-friendly community, and the age-friendly communities network really look at those 8 different domains of supporting older people. So there's the physical built environment, outdoor spaces, transportation, housing. There's this social environment that enables people to continue to be socially engaged, be able to participate, to have that inclusion and respect within society, as well as recognizing the value they play as participating in the civic society, as well as in paid employment. And then there's the whole social and the social environment, be that information communication, as well as community, having services to promote community support and health services. So when you look at those policies, services, and the structures, you need to be thinking about then how to apply an age-friendly lens to your work. So recognizing that strengths and resources that older people bring to the community, anticipate, respond to the flexibility to age-related needs and their preferences, respect people's decisions and life course choices, support the safety and well-being of those who are most vulnerable, and engage older people, encourage them to contribute to all areas of community life. So nothing for us without us, as drawing from other communities, that we need to have older people at the table when we're looking at policies. So what can we do? We can rethink how we view aging and older people. We understand that people are affected by the social context in which they live and the policies across their life course. So it's not just, it's the way in which that the social determinants of health and the availability or access to supportive policies may not been lacking in the past, maybe contributing to some of the challenges they're experiencing at the current situation. We also, as individuals, need to name and challenge ageism when we see it. Just a quick note, I was talking to I was at a dinner, and there was an individual there who is a fairly senior lawyer in Toronto, so I'll just name it as Toronto, and she was talking about seniors moment and talking about, you know, how relating very stereotypical myths to herself and around being older. And I said, you know, that's ageist. Like, I just want you to know, you know, that's you're saying that, but really you're continuing to this stereotype about all older people are this way. And she said, well, if I want to say that about myself, I can. And I thought, well, I guess, but you know, you wouldn't say something racist, would you? Or would you say something derogatory about your sex or gender? Because we know that we've now been somewhat, I hope, climatized to recognize that. And so I think it's important that we challenge ageism when we experienced it. And we also need to obviously advocate for some age inclusive policies. So I wanted to just give you a couple of little things that we do at the Center on Aging in Nova Scotia. In 2021, we linked up, we partnered with Community Links in Nova Scotia to celebrate some of the contributions of older adults during the pandemic. So we had heard so much about how, you know, older people were vulnerable, and yet there's so many of our communities, it was the older population who made sure that people who were vulnerable had access to groceries or transportation, or had the PPE, protective equipment that they needed. So we really wanted to celebrate and recognize and thank older individuals and groups for the work that they had done, and to learn about the way in which Nova Scotia, and I'm sure in New Brunswick as well, you know, had stepped up during the pandemic to help others. We felt that was really important. This year, we're doing a new lens on older Nova Scotians, and we're really collecting photos. We're inviting people to help tell the story about, you know, the change, and like change the narrative, I guess, and the way that older people make important contributions to their families and to their community. So that's happening this year. Again, we've partnered with Community Links for this photo collection. At the Center on Aging, we work on research that helps to dispel the myths and the assumptions, and give that tangible evidence to demonstrate the contributions that older people make. We do try to include older people, persons with dementia, their family, friend, caregivers throughout that research process. Many times they're part of, we have an advisory board, but they're also part of advisory boards on the particular projects that we work on. We partner with knowledge users as well. We participate in these think tanks, et cetera, and importantly, try to train and teach students the value and opportunities of including older people and what the dignity of all individuals. Next year, we'll be hosting a summer program in aging, which is for trainees across Canada, that will highlight the living longer living, older adults. So thinking about that group 85 and older, and the way in which they are an important factor, component of our society. So we've talked about this, how we talk about aging, but what I want to say is how we should talk about older people, and that's you know, really to recognize and be respectful. We recognize the dignity of each person, speak to them directly as an individual who is valued, and see that population aging as an opportunity, not as a silver tsunami, but as a rising tide. Because essentially, older people in our society are multifaceted. They're not necessarily needing care or care dependent. And spending on our older population is clearly a worthwhile investment. Supporting older people does not, and older workers does not hinder youth employment, and really to recognize there is no typical older persons. Finally, I just want to make a small mention of this wonderful document from the UK that really tries to challenge ageism and offers some very specific guide to talking about aging and an older age, and trying to shift that association of older persons only with frail and vulnerable, and used more preferred terminology rather than the elderly, but moving it more towards that older person, that they're a person individual, that we don't you know, it's them, and we're not like that. And again, also just even the symbols or imageries that we portray, that we're recognizing that not everyone has a cane. If you look at some of the signage that we have in our society, our road signs, the imagery can reflect a vulnerability or frailty to older individuals. So I've given you the reference here. I strongly encourage anyone interested in this area to discuss it. So there's lots of different ways and opportunities. Nova Scotia's shift action was wonderful, as well as your aging strategy for Nova Scotia. Really feel that with the right policies and services, I love this quote from the World Health Organization, that population aging can be viewed as a rich new opportunity for both individuals and societies. So in summary, I would say that yes, our population is aging, but it's a rising tide, not a tsunami. It is really up to all of us to prepare for the changes ahead. We do need advocacy. We need it for long-term care. We need it for more home care, and we need it to support older workers to be continued to be valued in their places of employment in order to combat the ageism. And we also need each of us to self-reflect on our own ageist attitudes. And I was thinking about the song of Michael Jackson, you know, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. And so just for us to reflect on how are we in our own individual lives, and I know better than any of you, how do we challenge ourselves to combat that inherent ageism that we may have internalized because of the society in which we live. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for your attention, and welcome any questions that you may have.